Okay, in the previous lessons, we have learned about the differences between the descriptive, correlation, and experimental researchers. And we also discussed some major types of experiments, namely the laboratory, field, and natural. Okay, so we also learned about some of the terminologies we use in experimental research method. Okay, so again, this presentation is available in the description provided, so make sure to share it with your friends and classmates if you find this material to be helpful. And let me have this moment to thank all of the 182 subscribers to who just subscribe and show their interest to our contents. Okay, so your support really motivates us to create more contents like this. Now let us talk about the three major designs of experiments and some of the examples of these designs. Okay, so we have the major designs of the experiments. We have the pre-experimental, true experimental, and quasi-experimental research designs. Now, experimental research designs, we have the pre-experimental designs. This may include either single or multiple groups. Now, these groups may receive intervention which likely hypothesize to cause change with a dependent variable which will be measured at the later part of the intervention and post-test. Although pre-experimental designs appear to utilize some of the procedures of a true experiment, researchers cannot claim this design to be a true experiment because of lack of randomization and sometimes lack of control group, which should always be present with true experiments. Okay. Now, pre-experimental designs are formed as approaches to prepare towards the true experimental designs. So generally, these designs are the simplest form compared to true and quasi-experimental designs. Now, let us learn some of the examples of pre-experimental designs. We have the one-shot case study. Now, one-shot case study design is a measure of a single group's post test. So basically, this set of individuals inside the group will receive treatment or post test. Okay, so with the manipulation of the independent variables or the variable, the researcher will learn about how the independent variable may likely affect the dependent variable, but this design is deficient in such a way that it lacks control group or pretest to compare the effect of the independent variable to the dependent variable. Now, this design is also lacks control of extraneous variables, which means this experiment may likely be prone to some questionable results because of these limitations. Now, we have to learn again how important comparison of results is when it comes to experimental procedures. Let's discuss another experimental designs, okay? We have the one group pre-test, post-test. So this design shows us how the pre-test and post-test of an experimental group differ before and after the treatment. So this means, unlike the first design, the one-shot case study, we are now describing the difference between the pre-test or the before treatment and the post-test or after the treatment. Okay. Again, this is not also considered a true experiment because it lacks randomization and assigning subjects for a control group. Now, this design can be observed at some events like training programs where the participants' characteristics might be measured before training and then later be compared with the post-test results. Now, it is suggested with this design, uh, when time between pre-test and post-test is extended, the result of this design may suffer from factors such as mortality, history, and testing effects itself. Okay, now let's proceed with the static group comparison design. Now, static group comparison design allows us, the researchers, to compare the experimental and control groups. Okay, so unlike the previous designs, the static group includes a control group, okay, which can be compared to the experimental group. Of course, just like any other pre-experimental design, this design also suffers from a lack of random assignment of subjects. So this design is prone to individual differences, okay? So which may influence the results as extraneous variables. Although this design may lack the measure of pretest and random assignment of subjects, this pre-experimental design allows us to compare results from the different group of subjects. Okay, now we have the true experimental designs. Now, true experimental designs are best described to be the only design to demonstrate the causal effect of the independent variables because of the common characteristics such as random assignment of subjects and having a control and experimental groups. Now, these designs are considered to be most expensive because they require between subject designs or having different groups of comparison, unlike pre-experimental and quasi-experiment. Okay, now, the following are the variety of true experimental designs. Okay, we have the post-test only control group. When we say post-test only control group design, it randomly selects the subjects. So the researcher will likely randomly assign subjects for a control and experimental groups. For unavoidable events, this design is being used by researchers when groups cannot undergo pre-testing. Okay, so generally, this design after a treatment or intervention, the researcher will measure the post-test of both experimental and control group. Okay, so the effect of extraneous variables are likely considered to be of some or same on both groups, the control and experimental, because of the random assignment taken into account. Now we have the Solomon for group design. When we say let's first discuss the pre-test post-test control group. Now, pre-test post-test control group design allows the researcher to analyze the difference, okay, between the pre-test and post-test of both experimental and control groups before and after the treatment. Okay, what does this mean? With this design, a researcher can randomly assign the subjects to either control or experimental group. Okay, and then compare the pre-test, the post-test of both the control and the experimental groups. Okay, so in this design, it is also assumed that the effect of extraneous variables is the same on both groups. Now let's go with Solomon for group design. So basically, the Solomon 4 group design is composed of randomly assigned subjects to different groups. We have four groups. Okay, so one, it can have the experimental group with pre-test, treatment, and then post-test. So the second group, it can be the control group with pre-test and post-test, but no treatment. We have the third group. We can have this as a experimental group with treatment and post-test only, but no pre-test. Okay, and the last group we can have it as a control group with post-test and no pre-test and no treatment. Okay, so basically groups 1 and 2 are tested using pre-test and post-test method. On the other hand, groups 3 and 4 are tested using post-test only method. Okay. And lastly, we have the quasi-experimental research designs. Now, quasi-experimental research designs are almost the same as true experiment, but quasi-experimental designs do not randomly assign subjects, okay? So it is called quasi, which means partial or pseudo, okay? Quasi-experimental designs are likely used in order to estimate the causal impact of an intervention. So sometimes this includes the investigation of the after fact. Okay, so this means the ex post facto. So basically, these designs allow the researcher to determine factors that might affect the possible differences of the intervention. So again, the difference between the quasi and true experiment is the randomization of the subjects. Okay, now let's go with the different examples of quasi-experimental design. We have non-equivalent group, regression discontinuity, and interrupted time series. Okay, let's first discuss the non-equivalent group. When we say non-equivalent group, it is between subjects design. Okay, so in a quasi-experiment, researchers call non-equivalent groups with non-random assignment for control and treatment groups. Okay, so it is called non-equivalent because we have the control and experimental groups. So this design does not randomly assign the subjects to conditions. Okay, so this has two different groups again, the treatment and the control. And then with these conditions, the subjects have not been randomly assigned. So the subjects are likely similar in characteristics to achieve the objective of the research. For example, a researcher might want to explore their demographic backgrounds for an instance. So the researcher will analyze first and consider all the possible confounding variables that make both groups almost similar as much as possible. Okay. So we have the regression discontinuity. When we say the regression discontinuity, it is a quasi-experimental pre-test, post-test design. So this design tries to elicit the causal effects of the intervention by assigning cut-off. When we say cut-off, we are dividing the group into two parts. So the above threshold and the below threshold. The above threshold may likely receive an intervention. On the other half, the below threshold will not receive the treatment. Okay, so often below threshold are the control group, while the above cutoff is the treatment groups or the experimental group. Okay, so by comparing the observations, lying closely on either side of the threshold, it is possible to estimate the average treatment effect in environments, okay, in which randomization is not possible, okay. And we also have the interrupted time series. When we say interrupted time series design, it is a multiple measurements of data over a period, okay, of time. So, for example, weekly, monthly, or yearly. So, before and after an intervention. So, in this design, knowing the exact time when an intervention happens is important feature. Okay, so interrupted time series design is like a pre-test post-test design in that it includes measurements of the dependent variable both before and after treatment. But unlike pre-test and post-test design, however, in that it includes multiple pre-test and post-test measurements. Okay, so as we have mentioned a while ago, we have the ex-post factor. When we say ex-post factor, it is after the fact research. Okay, so basically an ex post facto design examines how an independent variable or pre-existing conditions present before the study or how it affects an independent that dependent variable. okay, or the difference among groups of the subjects. A researcher can determine certain characteristics of subjects as a basis for grouping, or there could be a prior study conducted, and ex post facto research design tries to investigate the effect of a previous treatment, sometimes after such a study. Okay, so as a quasi-experiment design, subjects in this study are not randomly assigned. Okay, and they are grouped based on the pre-existing series. Okay, so these are the references that we have. Again, you can download this presentation right here. Yes, so I think this concludes our discussion, and thank you so much